Hello and welcome back to our Mega-lo-Mania in Unreal Engine. So last stream was Wednesday and we were working on trying to utilize the sector controller within our game. Let's have a look at the state of play at the moment. So we've got the mini-map functional and the slab or the sector view kind of updating. The amount of players are correct. The bulk of the menu system works where completed. We have to tie up some events and bits and pieces for the rest of the menus, but the research menu showing the research applicable to the island, so there's improvements there. So I think what we wanted to do today was actually fix up the allocation, deallocation of researchers, and then kind of see where we are with that. Because we want to, we've currently got all the implementation for that in the player controller where it was before. Basically, the player controller has population variables, and all the events came through the player controller for what should or shouldn't happen. And because of the way the game separates sectors, that effectively each sector is completely independent from another, so need a way to ensure that that remains the case, and therefore you can't have, or we can't have, all the events going through the player controller. The player controller can't keep up with what population is allocated to which task on all the sectors. It doesn't make any sense. So the simpler approach would be, well, hopefully what will turn out to be the better approach, will be to probably route everything through the player controller so that it's still the player controllers interacting with the game, but actually allocate those people on each of the sector controllers specifically. So when we deallocate people, we are running through our UI task. Our task is the one where we have an item on the left, our allocation of population in the middle, and our timer on the right. It is a little bit off center when rendered in the research menu, but that's not a problem here. I don't know why. I think perhaps because the width of the widget may be a bit too much. I think maybe we can just see if that's true, since I just said it. No, we can't seem to provide a background for our horizontal box, and can't provide a background for our canvas either, so it doesn't seem like a way we can easily find out if that's true. But anyway, I'm gonna ignore the fact that it's off center for now, and actually just focus on the interaction. So the interaction is left click to increase, right click to decrease. That's pretty much all the controls that they should have. Now the allocation, population text, and the tech level image, they're both designated as variables within this widget, but it's the population container that handles the effective mouse events, because it gives us the mouse down and the mouse up events. So they're still defined as before, and they are still calling the begin modify population event. That should still be handled by the parent widget. So we're propagating the task event to the parent, which in our case will be the root menu. So in our screen, sorry, the root screen as we're calling it now, the root screen. And we put it in the root screen so that a task widget can be reused in multiple contexts. We want to be able to use it for allocating researchers, allocating builders or construction workers to building buildings. Multiple buildings, in fact, can be built at the same time, and doing manufacturing jobs if the factory has been built. So if you say that they can be researching, they can be building 2 buildings, because the third building, the factory, would have to be built, and doing the manufacturing, that's effectively three completely different tasks that they need to be doing. And if you're not building the factory, if you're not manufacturing, you're probably building the factory. So maximum of three kind of tasks going on at one point, in terms of allocating and deallocation of people, and that's not including the resource gathering, which again could be up to 4 different resources. So an individual sector will probably have about seven inputs in terms of population allocation. But at the moment, so the root screen, set up research task, bind to chain screen. So just trying to find, so it sets up our player controller here, and it used to get the allocated population from the player controller, but we know that's not going to be the case anymore, because it definitely has to come from the sector. But the actual event will still, I think, still should go via the player controller. Theory is that if we have multiple players, or if we have AI players, then they are effectively being ran from their player controller. Particularly in relation to AI, I think this would apply. It'd be the AI player controller that would be initiating particular events, and those events would have to be caught by the sector to deallocate population for the AI. So if we route all the UI events to the player controller, they can route them to the kind of internals of the game. So we call setup research task, which sets up the local navigation, the local representation of research, but that's not our it's not our first place, because by then the research has already been done. Yeah, so I'm looking at the root menu, and it's not the root menu, is it? We want to be looking at the research screen. Because it's the research screen that creates that task, and it's the research screen that handles the event. So this event handles the clicking of a particular research item, and somewhere this is in the render available text. So event graph, render event available text. Yeah, so some of this information is still coming from the player controller, so I'll have to sort that out, but just trying to find where we tie to that. Yeah, it must be on the task icon click, mustn't it? Because that's where we create our unselected design. Find the design. Yeah, that's reallocate population event. It's not so much of an event, is it? It's more of a function on the player controller. Just trying to find the right place where we deal with this. So it's not that one. Going to be in this current design, isn't it? Yeah, there we go. The begin modified population, the end modified population, and the mouse leave. They're the 3 key events that the task provides. And all we're currently doing in the research screen, for the mouse leave, we're propagating the stop allocating design, or designers. And for the mouse end, we're basically doing the same. So it's stop allocating or end allocation of design. Well, it could be the end of the deallocation, because they both work in the same way. But the key one is the mouse down, which is either allocate for left, deallocate for right, and we push that into the player controller. I don't think that actually had to be a completely separate piece. Could be that. So the event still propagates up to the player controller, which is where we want it. Just need to check. I think that, yeah, when we were working on rendering the available technologies, we actually took out the bit of code that sets up the player controller on the research screen. So I think we definitely need that back. It's fairly straightforward. Take that, put it here. So we'll do that first again. So now we've got that player controller back, and that means the event will propagate okay. For each tick, we're handling the current design and the player count, all that kind of stuff, which aren't actually applicable. But we'll get back to that. So when it actually gets to the player controller, one thing that we can do here is say, well, the player can only really be looking at and therefore interacting with directly one sector at a time. So we could keep a reference to that sector within the player controller, and then all the player controller has to do is when it gets those UI events, or perhaps makes those AI decisions, it could simply call the functions or initiate the events for the sector. But equally, the sector could be listening to the player controller when it becomes active by a particular player. And another one of those situations where I'm not really confident on which way round it should be. Both work fundamentally, but one will likely be better than the other moving forwards. So at the moment, where is the blueprint? So the level blueprint is a bit untidy still, but functionally it handles the transition between one sector and another. So at this point, we know who the player is and which sector they're meant to be looking at. So we want either the sector to listen to player events or the player to initiate sector events. Now I suppose since at the moment we're saying that the player needs to interact with the sector, and what the player does may make changes elsewhere, it does seem to make more sense for the sector to listen to the player events. So this flow is the event for selecting of a sector. We find the particular sector, validate it, highlight it, update the slab image that we have. We create the player list. Yeah, I'm going to put that out and to say that probably shouldn't be recreated every time the player clicks a different sector, because the player list doesn't actually ever change during the change of sector. Yeah, so I'm not quite sure why I did that, but okay, so I've just marked that. I'll fix that later. So we set the... Oh, that's part and parcel of the same thing. Then we can create the container. The container is where the menus all are, and we render them. And it's the active sector that we want, which is the sector controller output from here. So if it's valid, so that's updating the let's call it map and the slab. It's updating the map and the slab. That bit we'll ignore because I think I need to change it, and that sets the menu. So I think we want to do the, we'll do it here. So, get the player controller. Maybe, where are we? We're in the game level. Yeah, so I think like we've done in all the other occasions, we really want to get the player controller and cast it straight away. So we'll cast. So we cast to the player controller. That's going to be the player controller. Promote the variable. Whole bunch of a whole bunch of events from the player that's never going to make any difference. Okay, so our player controller is set. Do that right at the beginning. And then in this space, again, just to try and keep it neat. Wrong way around. We'll do the menu creation second. And from here, we will bind. So we want to bind two particular player events. So bind to event begin modify population. We have that twice. Not really sure why we have it twice. So look. Event graph. So the thing is, these events that we can bind to, so it'll be the sector that takes that. So we've got start allocate population here and start allocate designers. So what can we bind to in this case again? Begin modify population. Yeah, I think they're the ones. I suppose one thing that we could have done was if the sector controller was an actor or a pawn, then the player controller could possess it when it moves between them. That, don't know if that makes any difference, but it would be a way to have that connection between which the active sector is and where the player is actually looking. But anyway, looks like the only events we have is the begin and end modification. There's obviously a couple of others related to other things, so I might need to figure out kind of where those events are coming from and why we have them multiple times. Certainly having them multiple times isn't particularly great, but I think we take that one we had. we have two events, the first one, the second. So if I bind to the first one and bind to the second, see what happens. Okay, so in both cases I can't, it's not coming from the player controller. Why does that's why. I wonder it didn't make any sense. What have I got now? Now that I've context sensitive the menu, see what actually the player controller has in terms of events. Okay, so that's a bit better. I mean, it's not helpful because they're none of the events that I want, but it's more clear where they're coming from, because the player controller itself doesn't actually have any event delegate dispatchers. So hello again, partly. So what events do we want? When I worked on it earlier, when we set up the events for the researchers, I tried to make sure that the player controller didn't have events to allocate people to. They allocated people to specific categories rather than actual specific jobs. So we didn't have someone doing research, we just had designers, and we wouldn't have someone doing building the mine because we'd just have builders. But since there is actually a finite amount of things the population can be allocated to, perhaps it's better to be a bit more specific. Maybe. Because the researchers would be doing research of a particular research technology, which could be known by its name. We'd still need a category in that case. Yeah, we'd still need a category. Okay, so we're gonna go with our allocate population to event, because we've already got allocate population elsewhere, so we're going to have to sort out what they are called later. But the allocate population from to quantity minimum, that's actually a function, isn't it? So we don't really want to copy that. Allocate designers and start allocate population. Yeah, okay, so we'll go with our task, which is one of our enums of population task, and we will go with, this is allocate population and a name, which is a name. So we'll also just add a new one here. Okay, so we have our allocate population 2. It takes a population task, category, and name, and we'll have stop allocating population. That'll be number 2 as well. Just to keep them consistent. I clearly don't need stop allocating population 2, but it should be stop allocate deallocate. which might need a number 2, but we've got the number 2 there consistently for the time being. So in our event graph, we capture or get called from elsewhere for these particular events. And then we were basically kind of internally propagating that to a more specific task. Since we're not going to do that at this level anymore, we don't, well actually I think we do need that because that's what the UI calls. Even though the UI doesn't have to do that anymore. So the research screen task, the task is calling begin modified population, which is getting propagated from the parent over here on icon tech clicked set task. That renders it. So on the task, yes, on the task. Research screen. Find the right event again. Here we go. So on the player controller, it calls the start allocate population, but what it can call instead, we just drag that out of there. That one and call. We can literally call that event over here instead, and it can be the design task, and its name can be whatever the current design is, which we don't actually know, which is a bit awkward. Thought we did. On tech icon click knows, but we don't store it within here, do we? We don't store it within the research screen, but we do store it within the task. Okay, that's okay. We can deal with that. So we should be able to do that. Get task. Probably would be a little bit cleaner if the task itself propagated that alongside the other mouse events, but for now we can drag it in from there. So that will be our start, and we have within our player controller, which is now put over here, got the stop allocate, so I'll tie that up as well. Yeah, our task isn't quite complete because we do have a reference to the population, and it is. Does it use it actually? Oh, it does set it, that's all. Yeah, the point is the task could be representing construction, manufacturing, or research, so it's not up to the task itself to tell the player controller. So it shouldn't actually need or wouldn't actually use the player controller, so I'll have to clean that up at some point. Why are you upset? Oh, need to compile the player controller. Yep, okay. And we need end modified population again, so in this case it's just kind of calling that function, so we want to instead call the event. So the key thing is that it's got this little envelope on it, so we know that it's an event. So we do that. That should be enough for now. So we want to bind to those two new events. Play controller in both cases. And the bit that's... Did I make a... No, I didn't make another one. I just did it wrong. The bit that actually wants to bind to them is the current sector, which is defined here. Now, one thing that we can preempt here is that we want to make sure that when the sector is replaced, effectively when a new sector is selected, we unbind the events. So as soon as we know that the sector is valid, we're going to set a local variable called current sector. We'll push everything over to the left here, so we've got enough room to put that in the right place. Tie it all up. So now we've got that current sector, we can just before current sector get unbind. Okay, or player controller unbind. Do we not need the... Maybe we don't need the... Unbind event from, all event from, no. Okay, let's... That might be right, but we'll jump into here. Just quickly see what we're working with here. I don't think that we need a event on the current sector. Yeah, so we need an event, which means we probably need a dispatcher, not a function. So on start allocate population and on end allocate population. Hello, some game dev. Mega-lo-Mania. Mega-lo-Mania is a game from 1991, released on the Amiga, the Atari, a couple of other platforms. It's a strategy game. Obviously a strategy game from 1991, so it's not quite the same as the strategy games of today, but it's about doing research, building armies, claiming what they call sectors, parts of an island, and effectively defeating the enemies on all the levels. So it's a strategy game that I played quite a bit when I was much younger. It's always been one that I enjoy playing. I think it may lack quite a lot of the modern kind of features, functionality, that kind of thing, but the core gameplay was always good, and it was just a good game for its time. So we've got our events on our sector controller, so I'll actually put that in the same window as my player controller. It's 2D. Mega-lo-Mania was 2D back in its day. I'm actually recreating it with all the original graphics, with a slight variation depending on which version of the game I've got the graphics from. So all of the menu and the islands look pretty much the same from the original version to my version. If I start it up, it's not quite working, but something like the slab, I don't have the big image here in the same quality as the actual game here on the PC, but I have all of the images, and it's all in 2D. So we're actually within the level that I've created here, the slab as I've called it, which is kind of the main view of the sector. That's in the 3D space, but it's obviously just a 2D object, 2D actor. And most of the other part is just UI, because it's mostly images, but we have where's the sprites? So there's animations for the characters. You can see down here, little animations. But again, they're in 2D, and they're only 4 frames, so quite basic graphics. In some regards, kind of the pixel graphics are still going strong, despite the fact that they're quite old. But obviously, even then, the pixel graphics in this game are old. So just tie up our events here. Maybe I'm binding the wrong way around here, aren't I? Shouldn't be that that's binding. It should be that. I'm doing it all myself. So unfortunately it's not in a state where it actually runs very well at the moment. I think if I just remove those, that might work a bit better. Yeah, so at the moment I've kind of got some basic functionality in various places of the game, but all of the gameplay logic, I'm basing it off what the game does, but I don't know 100% what that is. So when I really do get into the actual core of the game, the combat system, the AI system, those kind of things, it's all going to be done within Unreal and within Blueprints. I'm just gonna make it up as I go along, but try and make it, at least to start with, as close to the original as I can. So my main reasoning is that I wanted to learn how to do Unreal, and doing a game where I'm kind of following a set design kind of means that I can skip all the kind of game design part and focus on actually getting it to work, which makes learning the editor at the same time a little bit easier. But also it's kind of a good challenge to see how close I can make my gameplay to the originals. Once I've got a good copy, once I've got all the bits and pieces working in a very similar way, then I can even work on making some improvements to the gameplay, to the underlying logic, or to the strategy elements of the game. I'm not actually sure how one gets an event from one class to initiate a event on another, and I think perhaps I'm just working through the wrong things here. I need my current sector to bind to the player controller. Maybe we should be doing it in the graph itself. Yeah, need to cast. If we did it this way, that way would work. So I think what we would need then is, rather than doing this way, we would have a function in our sector controller call it possessed sector, and we will give it a sector controller, and from that we then will be able to bind to our start and our end events. I'll call it bind to it. Then we will create an event, and we'll obviously make those functions instead of okay. So new function on allocate population on stop allocate the so I have the functions for all of the population events. Such. I can't seem to switch their order around, and I want their order to be different. Just switch the order around manually. A bit bigger. So we've got our functions here. They need to actually have the right signature, so we can copy the signature here. It's a task and name for starting, and it will be the task and name for stopping. Can't seem to copy from the allocate population directly the other event dispatcher. It's a bit odd, but nonetheless. So now within the sector controller, these functions have to have the same signature. So the first one will be type, which is a population type. Next would be name, and that's just simply a name. Deallocation would be the same. the stop again would be the same arguments. Actually, though, since you can only be allocating to one thing at once, the stopping should be fairly obvious. So I don't think we need any input for that. I think we actually do. Yeah, we do have the input here. I'm going to take that away because I don't think we need to know. So we know event graph, possess sector graph even. Create event. Nope. It says it's missing a function signature, which is fine. It's not got a function signature, but it also doesn't let me define one, which is unhelpful. Maybe if we... where are we? We are in the sector controller. The sector controller should not have this function. That's why I've gone a bit wrong. That is the wrong place. Yeah. Yeah, create event, pull off. Create event, I think, is what I was trying to do. Let's see if it works a bit better by putting the functions in the right place. So my theory was that the player controller would be given the sector that it needs to possess, basically the one that it has to bind to. I put that in the sector instead, which wasn't the right place for it. So now we're gonna bind to, can't bind to anything. Trying to get this the right way around. I mean, obviously it can call the function, can't it? But it doesn't want to do that. Start allocate population 2 is name, population type and name. So we can take that from there. See if that works. No, so the sector controller has a function which takes, maybe it's the references part it doesn't like. Let's make it exactly the same. Okay. Has that function. Okay, there we go. So we can do it now. Okay, that's probably what we want. Yeah, so I can't do a custom event within a function. I don't want to do it at the level of the player controller. Let's see if... where's my player controller? So I wanted to do it, or I potentially wanted to do it. do it. Yeah, I was going to try and do it here. See, the event is my player. So, yeah, so you're saying... Hey, I'm the top Unreal Engine streamer at the moment. It's good to know. Okay, so you said you did pull off the event and use custom event. Then delete that connection and then use create event. So delete this connection. Oh, okay, yeah, I see. You've got that, and then it works from here. Okay, yeah, I see that working. But that's what the bit that's confusing me and is difficult, because I've not done it before yet, is I want the player controller that has the event to trigger an event on the sector, because it's the player controller is kind of handling that player input, but it's a sector that wants to action it. Whereas this works well, and that definitely does save some time in the future where I've had to create one of these by hand with the right inputs. Doing it your way worked quite well. So that would run the event within the scope of the game in this case, or wherever. But I could have done that similar behavior within the sector. Yeah, but I'll have to give the sector the player rather than the player the sector. So this basis is that I'm binding locally to the event. Yeah, this doesn't seem right because I'm binding to the event. The player controller is controlling the binding, and it's just calling another function. That doesn't feel right, particularly if it wants to unbind it. Okay, so it makes most sense for the sector controller to get given the player. Yeah, I'm very much the same at this point. It's sometimes it takes some time to get used to how things work. I've done event stuff before. I've worked on fairly big projects that have events, but you kind of get into the this is how it works within this project scope, and you just do it that way all the time, and you almost don't even think about it. Whereas obviously within Unreal, it's the same concept but different pieces, and to know quite what the right direction to tie things up is definitely new. I don't know what to call my function. Bind to player. Yes. Yeah, I'm not criticizing in any way the Unreal Engine as a whole. It's definitely been good. I mean, there's been things that have been a bit awkward. There probably still will be, but the general functionality and obviously the general performance of the engine is good. It's just getting your head around how you can do things, and then much like all programming, there's many ways, but then trying to figure out what the right way is. But so far, the engine has really been really good. Yeah, the same again. Partly it's the blueprints does make it different, I think, as well. And if you're working on, particularly in my case, um, yeah, when you're working on a game that's not going to be very graphical intense, like a 2D strategy game from the 90s, then the performance of Blueprint's going to be more than enough to handle it. And it's just fun kind of tying things together like this. So, bind event start. Bind event end, or stop as it is. Yeah. What is that? Yeah, well, nothing's perfect. Blueprints from Hell Tumblr pictures, yes. The thing is, you can play that card with any programming language. You know, you can write really elegant C++, or you can write elegant JavaScript, Python, whatever else language it is. If you're only doing something small or something very specific, you can write the cleanest code ever. But once you scale that project up, dump in a couple of different developers with their different styles, you get code hell in any language. Blueprint hell kind of just looks nicer. It's more colourful. But yeah, definitely some of the screenshots in searching for blueprints from hell. Yeah. What can you say? Yeah, if nobody writes it, and therefore nobody's done it wrong or badly, then it must be the perfect code. Yes. I don't think I could do blueprints as a kind of exclusive thing. Well, at least not for a very long time. I wouldn't want to say that I'd have a career in doing blueprints and work on it for 10 years or more. I think that you probably start getting to the limitations of them by then anyway. And probably things like when I actually get to the game logic here, it's likely that the game logic and the blueprints that they do, yeah, the algorithms are going to be difficult. Yeah, I've seen a few bits and pieces about the actor components. The way you can kind of just drop in functionality onto an actor, and 1 minute you start with an actor that doesn't do anything, and you can drop in all the different components for it. That definitely looks like something it works really well. Yeah, I think when it comes to UI development, events are pretty much the way to do it, aren't they? You can't. You'll soon learn that if you've got a UI that doesn't do events, kind of event-based system and things like that, your UI just causes the whole thing to grind to a halt. Whether it's a game or an application, it's just not the way you can do it. But yeah, I think tightly coupling things is probably one of the things that I see people doing, and even I do, just without even realizing. And it's kind of like you go back over it some point later and you think that's not flexible. It's just too easy to do. It's like I'll have this object here referenced over there, and I'll tie this together, and I'll either knowingly say I'll fix it later and probably never get around to it, or just not even realize what you've just connected there, because you're always after it, that particular feature working. So one issue that I have here is that I can bind to the events. Not quite sure why that one's complaining. Oh, forgot the play controller. I can bind to the events, and I'm fairly certain that's going to work. We can print a string in the allocate, and the deallocate. Not that that one's tied up yet. And the stop. Funky. World context objects exposed. Yeah, I'm not quite sure where that came from. I think this isn't the latest version of the editor either. Which version am I using? 4.19.2. 4.19.2. So maybe it's something they added in 4.19.2. I can't say I've noticed it, but I just dropped down print string. Maybe it's because I'm in a different context. What's it like in my player controller? Ah, yeah, in my player controller, it doesn't have that. I guess then in my game. Yeah, it doesn't have it in my game either. It's something to do with where it is. Where's it gone? This blueprint that I have, the sector controller isn't anything but an object. So it's just a base object. It maybe should be an actor, but it's not. So, do you know what it means? Does that mean my string's not going to show up? Because that'll be annoying, because I won't know if it's not showing up because I haven't tied up the event, so it's not showing up because I haven't got a world object. Because it's not showing up. Oh, because I'm not calling the bind from player anyway, so I haven't quite finished it, have I? Okay, doesn't sound like I'll need it. Over bind to player and unbound from player on my sector that I need to tie up in my game. Bind to player. And unbind from player. Yeah, so the issue that I have, and I'm actually taking the player controller here even though I don't actually need it at this point. Okay, well, we'll find out. Find out if print screen likes to have world context or not. I think that ties everything up. Yeah, the issue I have is that when I bind to the player, I create events, but because they don't persist anywhere but here, when I bind, all I can do is unbind all. I don't have the event, the red object, to put back, so I think that might be a problem. Not create widget. Maybe I just need a custom event. Yeah, so oh, you mean, yeah, okay, that, yeah, of course, that does make sense. Because I bound it to the function. Oh, no. Unbind, start, allocate population 2. That way. So that will work. I'm not sure if using a custom event would have been nicer though. Let's just see if that works. You know, it's a bit of a task. No, create event's all I've got, which ties to a function. Okay, that's pretty much how it is. What's that? Oh, tie up that. So we need to unbind from the right thing too. Keep doing the all one because it's there first. One. And that one. Okay, let's see if my print string works now. No. No effect. So this will be a bit of a challenge to figure out quite how far it gets. So our task has mouse button down, which calls the modified population. Try feeding it the world. Okay. Give that a go just in case. I think if I put a breakpoint in here, I'm guessing that, well, there's an error now, so maybe that, yeah, I'm not getting quite to that function yet. Clearly some errors. Okay, yeah, so there is one area where it's going to be a problem. And that's in the game where I'm unbinding from the player. The current sector might be null. So we best check that first. I'll skip it if it isn't. So that should clean up that first error that we get. But we're definitely not getting to the binding. Binding we must be doing. Validated get. Huh. That looks a bit neater. Definitely in this case where I just want to use that variable to do that. That's good. So I just right click and do convert to validated get. Definitely works well in this context where all you want to do is do something if it's good or if it's not. Yeah. Combines a get X with it is valid in one go. Yeah, that's nice. Thank you. It's little things like that that I guess without somebody saying, it's very difficult to find them. Despite the fact it's right there on the context menu. Yeah, that is a bit odd. You would think it would be a good trick for a Boolean as well. You could make it a macro though, could you not? If you were really desperate to combine those. Okay, so where are we? We need to start at the task which calls modified population. Yeah, you're right. You'd still have to pass in the Boolean value anyway, so by then you haven't really saved anything. I think, well, it saved a little bit. No, it wouldn't save anything at all. No, you're right. Yeah, it wouldn't help. Okay, so our research screen handles that event. Yeah, I did notice that one because of the way the node shows. That one didn't have that grey, whereas is valid is obviously a macro. And that is kind of just combining a couple of bits and pieces. Whereas the... where has it gone? The get. I don't know why that one isn't. I mean, it could be. It could be a standard macro in terms of their implementation. Although no, that's the thing, isn't that's why you couldn't combine the Boolean, because the macro doesn't have access to the variables of the graph, I guess. So get must be an internal kind of function rather than a macro. validated get is a bit of a weird node. It's very see-through in comparison to everything else. So it's the same as the set, and probably the same as the get, but it's odd that certain nodes have slightly different style. Particularly don't like it when their execution points don't tie up, or don't line up. But yeah, well, they've all got a little bit of transparency, but the get is a lot more transparent than the typical functions, or the typical nodes, even the macros. I don't really know why, obviously. I don't know why they wouldn't just put them as the same style with the kind of header. But I guess they're trying to make them stand out a little bit. Okay, well that's really why this isn't working, isn't it? Call begin modify population. Research screen. Tech icon, click. Set task. Set up current design. Yeah, it doesn't look like our so we definitely don't want to do that. Doesn't look like our set task actually ties up the events. Set task on the task, no, it's not here we want to do it. It's on the research screen. So the research screen says when you've clicked on a tech icon, find that tech. If we find that tech, set the tech on the task. Good. Set the visibility of the task. But what we don't do is call set current design task. Or sorry, set up current design task. Yeah, we don't want to do that every time, do we? There, that's where it is. That's what we've lost. Ah, there we go. Now we've got our print screen. We haven't distinguished the allocate, deallocate part, but at least we've got the event there. It does look, if we right click we get the stop, or sorry, if we left click and we get the stop, so that means that the world context can be null in this case or not provided. It works in both cases because we didn't have it in the stop. So we need to make that deallocate part work. Right mouse button. Oh, okay, yeah, I remember now why we had why we had two events. One of them was the deallocate. I just randomly removed it without thought about what it was that we were removing. So design. So the deallocate population one. It's not any of them we need. Player controller. It says I can reorder it, but it doesn't actually move. I do like my events to be in order, so I'm going to move that around. Don't want that. So bind to our new deallocate event. It has no arguments at the moment. Task and name. So when we deallocate, we don't need to say what, because the player can only be allocating or deallocating to one thing anyway. So we don't need to say what it is you're deallocating or allocating to. Let me just go and get rid of these twos now. I think they are unique. So our player controller, we need to tie everything back up in our... Let's start again with this. Start allocate. Start deallocate and... I think our allocation is slightly wrong. I think they just need to be references. Yep, that should be it. So that's all of our bindings. What's that? No value will be returned by reference. Not sure I care, but I don't like having the warning there. I think the bit that I get confused with is they're obviously references anyway, so I'm passing a reference of a reference, which obviously makes little sense. So what I'll do is I'll just change within the events. Well, that's a task and a name. Yeah, so it's a name by reference anyway. So I don't need to do that. So I need to check these. I think that's just confusing matters. Okay, so that's all the binding done. In this case we want to call so on here. No. Get the right event. So the task is the same on there and it's for the design. Nope, what errors do we have? Okay, yep. That one's okay. End's okay. Leave isn't. So we'll tie that one up too. Okay, so we should now be able to get all of our almost root screen seems to be upset for some reason, although we can't. Oh, that will be working with the yeah, okay. It's working with the old events. Need to tile that up again. Yeah, we'll have to call the player events. We'll do that in a bit. Let's see if this works. Yep. So all the events are firing, they're all going through and we're getting them on our sector controller. So our sector controller has population and our sector controller also now needs designers. Because our researchers or whatever we want to call them. That default value 0. Let's get them in the right order. So the player can only be allocating one set of numbers at a time. So how are we going to do this then? So the way that I had it working before was that basically when the player started allocating, it would create a timer, and when they stopped allocating, it would destroy that timer. I guess I can have the same concept here. So we've got set a timer by event or set a timer by function. Which effectively is the only thing we can do is go straight into create event anyway. But I think we can custom event here. So we could do it potentially like that. We can't do though is tie in what we're actually allocating and deallocating people for. How do we remember that we're allocating designers and therefore this particular task? Because for designers it's fairly straightforward. There is one pool of designers per sector, but for construction and resource gathering there's multiple groups of people that can work on that particular task. So we'd have to have a variable that can effectively store what the population is doing in terms of construction. Inevitably we'd probably end up with lots of population values for the different tasks, but hopefully stored slightly neater than just lots of blueprint level variables. But if we create a timer, we need to remember what the type and name of that task is, because I don't think there's any way to pass variables into the event. I think even if we did this differently, let's try this. That actually puts it, rather than into this function, it puts it here instead. Now, yep, my theory is that if we are here, we can set timer by event, and have access to the name and the type. So I'll put the time to just a second, see if this works. Yeah, so it does work. We're saying we allocate, deallocate for design, which is the population task, and boiling oil, which is the actual name. Just drop the name down there. So that works in that regard. Not necessarily keen on it because these variables don't seem to be, well, I'm not really sure how they stick around between all these contexts, but it works. That's the main thing. So we don't know if we're allocating or deallocating either. I guess it doesn't matter too much. Just need to make sure we unbind from all the events, otherwise we'll have issues later on. Yeah, so in this case what we'll do is we'll have this one as the start allocate. Don't even know what that one is. Let's not worry about that one. Yeah, so we set the timer by event. We need to remember it. So when we start the allocation, we set a timer, we execute over here. When we end, or when we start the allocation, we set a timer and go over here. We'll save it in the same variable because we know we don't need more than one. And we'll use this one to invalidate the timer. That'll do. Should stop it happening. Everything up to the appropriate events rather than the functions. see how that works. Not great. Looks like we don't unbind them properly or something. So we start the deallocation, that's fine, but I've let go of the mouse and it should stop. So why didn't it stop? Okay. See what that does. Doesn't seem to be invalidating the handle, despite the handle being set here and should be invalidated there. Maybe we should just set that to the invalidated handle. Nope, no change. The handle is invalid, and yet the timer continues. Okay, I don't have any clues on that. When we start allocate the population, we set the timer by event. Every 0.2 seconds with a looping. Set our population allocation timer or allocator timer. Exactly the same when we call the stops case, the deallocate case, but when we end it, we definitely come down here because we see the print string, but the invalidation doesn't stop the timer. Clear by function name. Let's find out. Oh, maybe we need to. So there should be a clear and invalidate timer by handle, which would probably do what I want. Clear and invalidate. Clear and invalidate timer by handle. Okay, so I can clear and invalidate timer by handle within an widget, within a widget. I could probably do it within a game. Yeah, within a game, but I can't do it within my sector controller. Well, that's unfortunate. The only thing I've got is by function name. Yeah, I don't know why that's happening. Doesn't look like there's a way to clear a timer by a handle within my sector controller. I probably wanted all of this in a function anyway, so I guess I'll just put it in a function. See if this actually works. Oh, did not mean to delete all that. First, see if that works. Still limitations with this though, isn't there? There's says it can be a function, an event name actually, so I could have used, or potentially could have used the events from before. Okay, that does look like it is working now. Maybe it doesn't like the spaces. Oh no, it's just slow. Okay, so I guess this really doesn't need to know which function name it's clearing. clear them all. Okay, that works. It's very slow, but it works. But by putting it inside that function, we lose the ability to use the type and name, so we can't put it into the function, but it does say we can do it as a custom event. Okay, let's see if we're in the right position there. The allocation doesn't work. Yeah, because we haven't tied that up. Yeah, minor typo. So the allocation should now work. Yep. Sure my names are right. That's why it's not particularly nice, because the names are all a bit awkward. I suppose it means that it is possible to kind of just join up to the allocation straight away as well, which is kind of useful. Okay, so I think I'm going to stop here. It's obviously taking a little bit longer to get my events tied up than I expected. Some complications, particularly with tying up the events. I think that's kind of the main thing. I think the way it works now it's the sector that is given the player the bind to the events and given the player again to unbind. This list of events is going to become quite long though, but that means that if a player controller is remote or if a player controller is AI, it should just be able to trigger the appropriate events to do actions. Not quite sure how the AI would work well with allocating in this manner, in this kind of gradual manner, but yeah, but no, it would. I think it would. The logic of the AI might be a bit complicated, but it could use a method of set this amount of designers and set this amount of builders, but it could also say start it and then at some point later remember to finish it, also stop allocating, so it would work. Nonetheless, we've got the flow of events going to now the sector, and it should be a matter of kind of applying similar logic that we have already got in the player controller to the sector to increment the amount of designers, in this case, and decrement them. and obviously then adjust the duration for the research based on the current amount of designers. So hopefully when we come back we'll be able to continue with that. So I may be back tomorrow, but I'll almost certainly be back on Sunday. Kind of early evening time. I should be able to do some more. I'll see if I can, at the very least, I'll try and find some time to kind of see if my tying events up is working as it should, or is as clean as it can be. But yeah, hopefully back tomorrow, if not Sunday, to actually make it work in terms of allocating and deallocating population from our UI to our sector controller. So yeah, thanks for watching. If you have not subscribed already, then please do, or follow as it is in this case. And thanks for those that was involved in some discussion. It was good to have a chat with those there in the chat. So yeah, hope to see you again, and good night for now.